Hello everybody, Weegee here, and let's talk about episode 6 of RWBY Queendom, Do You Have a Plan? The episode picks back up right where the last one ended, with Blake and Ruby squaring off against Negawise, who makes some comments about Faunus not belonging there, with Blake then baiting her by questioning her hay of the Faunus to distract her so Ruby can make an escape. This scene really shows that Blake has gotten over her distrust of Weiss, as she doesn't let Weiss's comments affect her, instead using them to her advantage to draw her attention away from Ruby, so Ruby can escape. It shows that Blake has already separated the two Weisses from each other, acknowledging that what this Weiss is saying is the Grimm trying to drive them away, something that Ruby had trouble with the first time she came face to face with this Weiss, which really showcases the differences between the characters. Ruby's a character mostly ruled by her emotions, so the Grimm could get to her a lot easier. Blake, on the other hand, has a better hold of her emotions, at least she used to, not so much anymore. This scene also has some more confirmation that Weiss views Ruby as something she holds dear, and we get our first hint at why she has her most precious things locked up. But we will get to that later. Blake successfully draws Weiss's attention by criticizing her method of protecting what she holds dear, and Ruby gets back to Yang, where they manage to escape the room without much resistance. Like seriously, there is no way putting this client here wasn't Weiss's way of helping them. Before this part, Ruby once again begins to question her ability to lead, as she wasn't able to discern Blake's plan as quickly as Yang was. I like this as it once again shows us that Yang is a lot smarter than the fandom thinks, but it also shows the sort of experience difference between Ruby and her older sister, and shows us that Ruby's rise to a good leader wasn't as seamless as the original show made it seem. She struggled with it, which again, and I feel like I'm repeating myself, makes Ruby feel a lot more human. The show then cuts back to the fight between Blake and Weiss, which has some interesting uses of 3D animation. I think I know where they are saving their animation budget. In this scene, Weiss mentions that she has driven Blake from her most sacred place several times. This is likely an allusion to how Weiss struggles to accept Blake for who she is. This isn't the first time that Blake has found herself in Weiss's mind. In this fight scene, Weiss also shows off an ability that she definitely didn't have at this time, summoning. After all, the perfect Shni wouldn't struggle with something as trivial as summoning, so it only makes sense that her perfect self would be able to do it. This also calls back to Xion mentioning that the dream Weiss would be as strong as Weiss let it be. Blake then uses 2 coins of hers and manages to slip away from Weiss. Weiss goes to follow her until Whitley shows up, telling her that Ruby and Yang have both escaped. Back to the sisters, and they have made their way to Weiss's inner heart, the entrance of which is Ouroboros, or the snake that eats itself. This symbol is usually used in media to symbolize infinite, rebirth, or never-ending cycles. This might be an indicator of Weiss's will to change, as change is sometimes equated to being reborn. It could also be how she views her life, as a never-ending cycle of the same thing, of her trying to change herself for her father or for the Shnees, which, with the heavy focus the show has put on that is a possibility. Ruby pulls her relic out, and it unties the snake, unlocking the path further into Weiss's heart, confirming the fact that Ruby is indeed the key to Weiss's heart. So, good follow-up on that. But more importantly, it shows us that Ruby is the one that made the change in Weiss's life possible. She is the one that broke the never-ending cycle that was Weiss's endeavor to be perfect. The person that showed Weiss that it is okay to change. Before they can proceed, Angry Klein shows up, and we get the best fight scene of the episode, in a short battle that ends with Klein being destroyed. Which was actually a little bit sad. Poor Klein didn't ask to be here. He was just trying to protect Weiss. Using the relic, they make their way through the Grimm vines. Halfway through, they meet up with Blake. Along their journey to the center of Weiss's heart, Yang mentions that Xion said not to touch the nightmare vines. During this scene, we also get one of the cutest shots of Ruby. Look at her smile and giggling. Doesn't it just make you want to pat her on the head? When they enter the core of Weiss's heart, it's in a concert hall, and we get to see the Grimm, which has Weiss's Volume 5 outfit above its head. Yang goes to call Xion, but is cut off by Weiss. Before we get to that, let's talk about Weiss's heart. Let's start with the location Weiss chose as the place to contain said heart, and what would appear to be the deepest part of her mind. It's a concert hall. The fact that Weiss is a musician is something that in the grand scheme of her character has been overlooked as far as importance goes. But I think Ice Queendom is going to show how important it was to her. I think music was the only way Weiss could express herself growing up. It's the only escape she had from her life, the only escape she had from the pressure that her father put on her. It was how she used her imagination that her father so cruelly shut down. The outfit she wears in Volume 5 was the outfit she would wear while performing these concerts. It also explained why Pyrrha was wearing that same costume. She is a person that Weiss views as a sort of mirror of herself. Her being a singer supports the idea that music was an outlet for her emotions. Back to the fight though, Weiss stops Yang from contacting Xian. Weiss then uses a wave of ice to drive them out of the concert hall and away from the Grim. In the process of being driven out, Ruby drops the relic, which is then surrounded by the Nightmare Grim's vines. Before the fight can continue, Weiss questions why Ruby would betray her, and asks her why she couldn't understand what she was doing to protect what is precious to her. Then she ridicules Yang for her treatment of Ruby, saying it's her fault that Ruby never grew up, and I think it's become clear to me where Weiss's resentment of Ruby and Yang come from. It's jealousy. Ruby represents the childhood she was never really ever able to experience, the childishness she was never able to express. As a child, Weiss was expected to act a certain way, to express herself a certain way, which is the complete opposite of Ruby, and she couldn't handle that. Then there's the relationship that Yang and Ruby have as sisters. They so freely express their love for each other, always supporting each other with no criticism behind it. I think this is what Weiss wishes her relationship with Winter was like. While they do love each other, that love is a bit more critical than Ruby and Yang's due to the circumstances of their childhood. The fight then continues and we get some more janky looking 3D animation. I think they should probably leave the 3D stuff to Rooster Teeth. During the fight, the relic is destroyed by the Nightmare, and Ruby is cut by its vines. The destruction of the relic means that they no longer have a key into Weiss's heart at the moment, though they're likely going to have to find the other relic, which seems like the most likely scenario, or they're going to need to somehow convince Weiss of what's going on. With the fight not going their way, Xian pulls them out of the dream once again. As they wake up, we see that the wound that Ruby received from the Nightmare Vine is still there, and we see why Xian warned them not to touch them. Unlike the wounds that they received from the occupants of the dream world, which don't seem to have an effect on their physical body, the cut from the Grim also cut Ruby in the real world, meaning that if the Nightmare were to severely hurt them, they could die in the real world. So, it's that, if you die in the game, you die in real life scenario. At least as it applies to wounds received by the Nightmare. As they wake up, Xian warns them that she only has enough aura to send them into Weiss's dream one more time, before she'll need to recover. And by the time she does recover, Weiss might be dead. So with this information, the members of Team RWBY split off from each other, think about what approach they should take to this final charge into the dream world, each meeting up with some person or people that help them better understand where Weiss might be coming from, or to devise a plan to help her. The show goes back and forth between these scenes. Instead of doing that, I'll focus on one character's scenes at a time. First up, we have Ruby, who goes to the cafeteria, where she laments the fact that she doesn't understand Weiss, before Team Juniper approach her. In a great little moment, Jean asks how they are depicted in this dream world, and Ruby struggles to answer. As how do you tell your friends that your other friend views them as idiots? She just tells them that they are locked up, just like her. Nice save, Ruby. This is where Ruby finally figures out why Weiss has them locked up, courtesy of Pyrrha and Red. Which is such a great scene. I love the moment where the characters finally have that aha moment. As a viewer, you can kind of figure out things before the characters, because you have more information than them. So when the characters themselves finally catch up with you, or figure it out for themselves, it's just a really satisfying thing to watch, especially if it's revealed that you are right. Back to the reason why Weiss has them locked up, it's to protect them. To protect the people and things that she holds precious. Having it all locked up in a room designed like her beacon dorm, and not like her room at home, says a lot about how Weiss views her own home, versus beacon. Though that probably has more to do with who lives in her home. We also explain the reason behind them being locked up. It's because Weiss is afraid of losing the things that she views as precious. Pyrrha says that she is trying to protect her memories from the Nightmare. This response makes sense if you look at her childhood, which is likely where this fear comes from, as most things she held dear as a child were taken away from her, whether it be by the way of Fang or her father. So her default way of trying to protect things is to hide them away under lock and key. John says how he wishes he could help, and this scene ends with Ruby saying, really. Now let's switch over to Yang, who after acknowledging what Weiss had told her about Ruby, is sitting on a bench before Penny approaches. Yang confides in her about a friend in a dream, and Penny responds with something that screams, I'm a robot. She says that maybe Yang needs some maintenance, because she's talking to herself. I don't know how Penny being a robot came as a surprise to anyone, with the way she acts in the show. Which I both love and kinda hate, because it definitely makes her seem less human, which is weird considering the entire point of her character is despite the fact that she's a robot, she's still very much a person. Penny then goes to explain that dreams are just maintenance your brain does to process excess information, and says that she tries to dream different things to change. and Yang gets an idea from that. Now let's go to our final member, Blake. She has once again met up with Sun at what appears to be the same cafe from their first meeting. This scene is less figuring out what to do about Weiss in her dream, and more Sun just reassuring Blake that she has had a positive effect on Weiss. He says that the fact that she is so present in her dream means that Weiss has been thinking about her a lot, and the fact that she keeps coming back means that Weiss has changed. It's a nice little scene that shows both Blake's and Weiss's progression towards getting over their initial doubts of each other, and affirms the desire both of them have to change for the better. They all meet back up and go back to Xi'an to explain their plans. First we have Yang's. Her plan is to change Weiss's perspective within the dream, to let Weiss know that it is okay to change. The only caveat with this plan is that the dreamer, Weiss, has to see the change as a positive one. I don't think this will be much of a problem though, not only because we know Weiss changes, but all things within her dream indicate that change is something she's also wanted. Hence the way to her heart involving unraveling the symbol of an endless cycle. She's just been terrified to actually accept the change. Next we have Ruby's plan, which involves using Jean to help them save Weiss within the dream, as due to being recently infected, he can move more freely around the dream, because the nightmare will see him as another infected person. The only problem being is that his body could reject the dream and he could die. That's obviously not going to happen though. I can already hear the fandom's rage at Jean being involved at all in this, especially the White Rose fans, as their greatest threat is White Knight. I don't have too big of a problem with the Jean being involved. Honestly, I actually like they got someone from Team Juniper involved, as it seems they've been reduced to a little more than background characters, and I like them a lot. So yeah, one of them being involved more is great. I mean, I would have preferred someone like Pyrrha, given how Weiss views her. She could probably move around just as freely. I also would have liked it if the entirety of Team Juniper got involved, as it would have been cool to see how Weiss's and their friendships came to pass. In the main show, we know that they are all friends, but we never really see how exactly that came to be. The only way that this could go poorly, in my opinion, is if Jean is the one that saves Weiss. But I don't really see that happening. Here's what I do see happening though. Jean manages to get into Weiss's office and gets a hold of the other relic, the one that represents Weiss's desire to change, the counterpart to Ruby's relic. When he gets a hold of it though, this camouflage he appears to have goes away, and he has to get the relic to Team RWBY. Afterwards, his body begins to feel the effects that Xi'an mentions, and they have to pull him out before he dies. From there, it's up to Team RWBY to save Weiss. And just for the record, I think it should be the entirety of Team RWBY that saves Weiss, not just RWBY. I think ultimately that would be for the best and will work in favor of the theme of the show, much better than it being solely RWBY. With the plan set, Team RWBY plus Jean are sent back into Weiss's dream for the final time. This time, it's do or die for Weiss. Before I talk about what I thought about this episode as a whole, let's talk about the proverbial elephant in the room. The 3D animation used in the fight scenes, because oh boy, it was rough. It felt really jarring and a lot more stiff than what most of us are probably used to with RWBY 3D animation, especially the more modern stuff. To be fair to Shaft though, it's always hard to transition from 2D animation to 3D. There are very few animation studios who can do it well, though I do wonder why they switched to 3D at such a weird time. My best guess would be to save on budget for later scenes, as these fight scenes aren't that important, and they might need to save the budget for a much cooler scene later. This does give me a lot more appreciation for the work that RWBY does do with their 3D animation. It also goes to show how hard it is to get 3D animation right. As for the episode as a whole, I really enjoyed the latter half of it. I always loved the scenes when the main characters split off from each other, to have little moments with side characters, as it gives us interactions between characters that might not talk very often, like we saw with Yang and Penny. But it also gives the characters and viewers those aha moments, as the characters get different perspectives on the situation, leading them to getting a better understanding of the situation, which in turn leads them to finally figuring out that crucial detail that they're missing. Here it's RWBY finally figuring out why Weiss has them locked up. For Yang, it's learning that maybe she can change Weiss's perspective in the dream, and for Blake, it's learning that she has had a significant impact on Weiss, and if she keeps pushing, she can help change Weiss and herself for the better. The re-inclusion of Team Juniper, Sun, and Penny here was also great. Having them come in and be the ones to help Team RWBY figure things out was a great way to use these characters. After all, they all have different viewpoints and opinions on Weiss, so they might be able to see things from a different perspective. Though as I said earlier, I would have loved it if all of Team Juniper went to Weiss's world and not just Jean. My feelings on the first half of the episode are a little more mixed, but that mostly has to do with the iffy 3D animation they threw in. It just kind of felt out of place. But if it was done so that they had money to make other scenes look amazing, like the shot in the Emerald Forest, then I'm totally fine with it. Or if they threw it in there as an homage to the original show, that's cool as well. As for everything else in the first half, I really liked Blake and Weiss's fight. Blake using Weiss's insecurities and negative feelings towards both her and the White Fang to distract Weiss from Ruby and Yang was ingenious, and felt like something early Blake would do. I really liked a lot of the scenery they used for Weiss's heart as well. From the Ouroboros symbol signifying Weiss's feeling of being stuck, to the core of her heart being an auditorium, shining a spotlight on an aspect of Weiss's character that doesn't get a lot of attention, her music, which seemingly by the fact that it's the core of her heart, means that her music means a whole hell of a lot to her. I'd be cool if we got to see Weiss sing again in this. Overall, this was a great episode that really ramps the tension of things up, with the reveal that they only have one more shot to save Weiss. It's probably one of my favorite episodes so far. I'd give it a 9 out of 10. My only problem was some of the 3D animation, which upon a rewatch wasn't as bad as it appeared, compared to the first time I watched it. So I'm not going to deduct points from my score for that. If I was going to deduct points based on animation, I'd have to give the early seasons of RWBY like a 5 out of 10, when I eventually get around to reviewing those. So if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, and consider subscribing. Tell me what you thought about the episode and the use of 3D in the comments below. Thanks for watching, Weegee out.